Hello everyone and welcome to Upstream's webinar, focused on the strategic role of vehicle SOCs in connected mobility. We are extremely proud to partner with Upstream, Accenture and Deloitte on the organisation of this webinar, which will be moderated by Rick Vicari, VP EMEA at Upstream. Rick, over to you.
Thank you, Al. A big thank you to our friends at Mobex, and a warm welcome to you all to this Upstream webinar organized in collaboration with our partners Accenture and Deloitte. We are live from Hanover as we are attending the IAA transportation event. Rick Vicari, VP of EMEA. My background is in automotive, telecoms and utilities. And with the connected vehicle and electrification, it feels as if it is all coming together. Today's topic is the VSOC, short for Vehicle Secure Operating Center. That is the dedicated cybersecurity detection, monitoring, and the remediation control room that car manufacturers are in the process of either planning, setting up and running in order to ensure safety and security for millions of connected vehicles worldwide. I will explore this exciting topic with three top experts in this field who have in common two things. First of all, they capitalized on their IT SOC experience to develop VSOCs from scratch. And they all have had a direct exposure to Upstream's platform, the core cybersecurity and the data anomaly detection platform powering the VSOC. Without further ado, let me introduce you to Leonard Eriksson from Accenture, Nishant Kaudia from Deloitte, and Yaniv Maimon from Upstream. Gentlemen, let's start with a brief round of introductions, please. We have a lot to cover today in a very short amount of time. Leonard, would you like to go first?
Sure, thank you so much. Hi all, and first of all, thank you Rick and the Upstream team for having us. My name is Leonard Eriksson and I'm a Security Consulting Manager at Accenture Security and I'm based in Hamburg, Germany. As subject matter expert or SME for VSOC, I am part of our global automotive security team, which serves many major OEMs, and I've led multiple VSOC and automotive security engagements.
Thank you. Nishant?
Definitely. Thanks, Rick, and thanks, Upstream. Thanks for including me on the panel. It's a great opportunity to speak on such a crucial topic. I'm Nishant Kadria, part of Deloitte Cyber Team in Germany, and I'm responsible here for vehicle cybersecurity. That means in and around vehicle. And we have been doing this VSOC project with local and global OEMs for last couple of years. So I'm very excited to be part of this panel and entertain you.
Fantastic. Thank you, Nishant. And Yaniv, last but not least.
Thank you, Rick, and hello, everyone. I'm Yaniv Maimon. I'm the Director of VSOC at Upstream. I lead both Upstream's VSOC as a service offering for OEMs, where we today protect over 10 million vehicles globally, and also AutoThreat Pro, which is a tailored cyber threat intelligence service for the automotive industry. Happy to be here with my colleagues.
Fantastic. Thank you all, guys. So although we will make sure to keep the conversation as jargon-free as possible, we can assume that our audience would be familiar with the transition to modern, connected, software-defined vehicles, which is currently underway. And I also think that our audience will be aware that there are over 250 million connected vehicles currently on the road, expected to quadruple in the next 10, 15 years. So the first connected vehicles were launched by General Motors over 15 years ago, followed by other global giants, BMW, Mercedes-Benz, Ford, Stellantis, Toyota, Renault, Volvo, Hyundai, you name it, right? And by their nature, 100% of electric vehicles are connected vehicles too. So the first question, what is your perspective on what is driving the rising demand for VSOCs within OEMs? And what are the key pains and requirements being addressed? So why and why now? Nishant, would you like to go first?
Sure. So I think the right question to start this, because why and why now? It's also the pain point of the OEMs and other fleet managers who want to implement this. So we see from our experience that regulation is definitely a trigger now. It's the driver to implement this, but I think this is not going to remain at that level that you just clear an audit and then forget it. So because you invest quite some money in that, there is a lot of infrastructure involved, a lot of ecosystem partners involved. So I think although the driver and trigger remains regulation, looking at the IT influence on the vehicles, it will go beyond that, much beyond that. So why now is definitely regulation, but I think if we see in the coming years or decades, it will definitely have much more business use cases.
Thank you. Very interesting. And perhaps Leonard?
Sure. So one of the additional reasons we see for the rising demand for VSOC is the increasing awareness for the impact of potential cybersecurity events. Cybersecurity is increasingly becoming a boardroom topic, as it should be, and as such part of more and more product development considerations. Just to give an example of this is the increasing use of risk assessment and risk management approaches specifically to address cybersecurity matters during the design and development of new vehicles, connected services, and vehicle components.
Thank you. Makes sense. Yaniv, what is your view?
Fully agree with my colleagues. I think regulation is a key driver. We're seeing, in addition to that, also real threats as they emerge, and we see real attacks. So some of them are made public, some are not. But I think we see a very large increase in recent years due to the hyperconnectivity of connected vehicles. So definitely real types of attacks that are of concern, of course, to the OEM. And in addition to that, also fraud. So this is also a driver. So the ability to detect and in some case to mitigate fraudulent activities is definitely also a driver that we see in the recent years. So things like warranty fraud or online services that OEMs provide today. This is also something that we can see as what's starting to be a major focus for OEMs as a driver.
Fantastic, fantastic. Really sheds a light on what is going on. So it is probably now the right time to look under the bonnet, pun obviously intended, and look at the key characteristics of VSOCs. I'm sure our audience would love to learn in particular about the key differences between IT SOCs and the VSOCs. IT SOCs have already been there for many years. I guess what VSOCs and IT SOCs share in common is at least three aspects, right? It's a set of systems and processes to generate alerts when anomalies and threats are detected, fine-tuning strategy to minimize false positives, and a set of systems and playbooks to put in place timely remediation processes. So it would be great if I may ask you guys to carry out a comparison on three levels. First of all, the nature of the assets being monitored. Secondly, the IT systems involved in running a VSOC. And thirdly, the remediation processes being planned and deployed. So shall we start with Nishant, please, this time?
Okay, once again, no worries, Rick. Yes, I think a pretty important question again. You asked basically four things. So IT SOC and VSOC relevance, yeah, or collaboration, let's say, and then the nature of assets. So what we see is definitely things are not orthogonal here in VSOC, right? Because as I said, the vehicle today is like a big software platform or a smartphone running on the wheels, right? So it's not like 30 years back, 20 years back, where you had a very minimal set of software, right? And as we go towards software and IT systems, there is some resemblance with the IT SOC and the protocols which we are having in traditional IT world, right? So definitely there are some advantages, but as you pointed out, the differences, and I will also go on those three criteria. So the type of assets are very different because here our assets are moving, right? And moving at certain speed or even not reachable sometimes, which is not very often in IT landscape. Secondly, you mentioned about the IT systems involved. I think this is going to be preliminary same, because all your big data platforms or dashboards or the playbooks or the engines are not very different for VSOC and IT SOC. There would be definitely some USP and some kind of use cases which you have to consider, but it's not going to be very different. But again, coming back to the end-to-end, the remediation part is again very different, because as we said, the vehicles are moving, right? So you can't just stop this moving asset from one point to another without knowing the context of the vehicle, and that involves a lot of efforts, a lot of time, and a lot of measures to ensure the road user safety when we do this remediation. And of course, it can bring a lot of cost. Over to you, Rick.
Makes sense. Thank you, Nishant. May I pass on to Leonard, please?
Sure. So Nishant already touched upon this, but the nature of assets that are being monitored is completely different, because in a VSOC, the foundational asset that is going to be monitored is a vehicle, and vehicles, as we know, tend to travel at high speeds on highways and on congested roads in populated areas like cities, for example, Munich. And any kind of cybersecurity incident might have an impact on people's life and safety. So the assets, to sum it up, are traveling a lot faster and a lot more often than your typical IT endpoints or servers, if you want to put it that way. And Nishant already touched upon this. The log collection mechanisms are also very unique. And aside from that, I'd like to point out that the attack vectors towards vehicles, the technical capabilities of onboard systems, and also the response capabilities of OEMs are quite different when talking about a fleet of vehicles that are being monitored compared to a set of IT endpoints. And just to illustrate this with an example, OEMs will have to be extremely careful when automating response or remediation actions, as the affected vehicle is most likely no longer under their control or ownership, and maybe even currently in use.
That's a very interesting aspect, right? The life cycle of a vehicle. Perfect. A lot has been said. Yaniv, what is missing?
Maybe to continue on Leonard's note on the ownership of the assets, this is, I think, a major differentiator that we see, right, from IT SOC, when they monitor usually the employees and the IT assets of the organization. Here, the vehicles are owned, by consumers, if it's a passenger vehicle, or by businesses for commercial vehicles. So there are definitely differences there. Sort of what are the different rules of engagement, so to speak, of what the VSOC can and can't do with an asset that they're not owning at this point in time. For example, what is legally permitted and what isn't. And if it's not currently legally permitted, maybe something should change on the ULABs, for example, the end user license agreement. And this is something that we've seen also, that some OEMs decided to change in order to make sure that the VSOCs can operate also on those assets. So that's, I think, a very important part. It's differentiated a lot. Also, being able to communicate directly with consumers, not necessarily something that OEMs are doing, especially not in the cybersecurity area. So also something to be on the lookout for, that needs to be probably built from scratch. And maybe just a last note on the mitigation and tools, as we see in the VSOCs that we've built and are operating, as we are monitoring these assets and these threats for the first time, basically at all OEMs. So if they were unable to detect threats, no one really built the response tools for it. And so we're working together with OEMs to build these response tools, and of course to make use of them very carefully, as mentioned before, because that too will hold the risk. But again, something that is definitely required, and we're seeing it evolving basically every day.
Excellent. Well, thank you. I guess it's a good segue to another question that comes to mind. I'm sure our audience is probably wondering the same. Is there a specific case for a dedicated separate VSOC, or does it make sense to have an integrated IT/OT SOC infrastructure, covering both internal IT and connected products, which in this case happen to be vehicles? Who wants to go last? So Nishant wants to go last, I guess. So Leonard, over to you.
Thank you so much, Rick. So given the differences between assets monitored by classical IT and OT SOCs, I would certainly advise to build and maintain a dedicated vSOC capability. However, I would not stop there, because one of my favorite questions to ask clients in this regard is who or what is monitoring, for example, the vehicle telemetry backend service or the servers hosting vehicle configuration files, because this can be like on the verge of IT SOC or vSOC, for example. And we have to keep in mind that adversaries are not bound to the organizational boundaries one might draw for whatever good reason, but will likely seek to exploit them. And the point I'd like to illustrate is that even though a dedicated vSOC capability might be the best approach to tackle the issues we talked about earlier, a company-wide holistic cybersecurity monitoring is what will bring the best long-term results.
Okay, makes sense. So Yaniv, would you like to go next?
Sure. And I think to address Elena's comment again, I think there is a sense of trying, to address holistically the cyber threats within OEM, IT, manufacturing, of course, the connected vehicles. But I have to say, at least in the present and probably in the near future, what we see currently is that OEMs choose to take a separate vSOC, and there are different reasons for it. And again, maybe down the line we'll see something similar to fusion centers like we see in other industries. But I think so far it's been challenging for OEMs. I've been working in IT SOCs for the past 15 years, so building, operating, consulting. I think there is a big challenge for these types of units to take on completely new domains. None of them is idle, right? Waiting for additional work or alerts or things like that.
Yep.
So definitely, even thinking of let's say cloud security, right? As an example, I think it took SOCs a very long time to be able to adopt these new sources, to know, the different threats and to know how to address them. And I'd say that I'd argue that cloud infrastructure and applications are much more similar to what they already familiar with IT. I think with vehicles, we're seeing something that is completely different. It's a different business. It's a completely different type of assets, and definitely a very separate and unique skill set that is required to address this. So at least, again, in the near future, we see it as a sort of a separate function that is dedicated just to that.
Very, very interesting. And last but not least, Nishan. We seem to have an audio problem, so we continue with the next question, which is actually very, very close to my heart. So we have just identified a number of assets that need to be monitored in a vSOC, and that send data to the OEM or any fleet owner for that matter. The connected vehicles, the consumer applications used to control some vehicle functions, telematics service, over-the-air update service, EV charging infrastructure, very interesting, inputs from other IT systems and IT SOCs, as we just discussed. So I wonder, should we elaborate on the importance of monitoring API security? And perhaps, Yaniv, you could go first this time.
Sure. So maybe before I answer sort of directly, maybe a bit of a context around this. All right.
Yes.
So we've seen, I think, a sort of an evolution, right, of the connectivity of vehicles or connected vehicle landscape. I think it started very siloed, right, with almost zero connectivity, and then we saw internal connectivity even within the vehicle, between different components and simple things like Bluetooth and Wi-Fi and things of that sort. And then we started to see, like we mentioned before, Rick, the connectivity to the backend OEM that was, using and still using to a large extent proprietary protocols, and again, only catering the OEMs or very specific third-party needs. But then we're seeing basically much wider adoption in recent years, right, with sort of hyper connectivity. A lot of third parties are starting to be involved. Charging stations, for example, for EVs are also something that communicates with the vehicles, and many other types of different entities that need to communicate. And that's, of course, where APIs come in. APIs is not a new thing, but maybe in the context of connected vehicles, it is relatively new. And they obviously need to be secured, right? So there is, let's say the classic, IT types of threats that need to be monitored, and this is already a field sort of, I think, maturing, but definitely there. But what we are seeing in the last in a couple of years is that I'd say the sort of the classic threats on API security, such as DDoS or injection attacks and that sort of thing, can be secured, right, on the IT aspect. But basically, the context of the vehicle is something that is crucial to understand, because in some cases it could be, for example, a request that seems, at least from the IT perspective, to be fully legitimate, but is not legitimate, or maybe even possibly malicious when looking into the context of the vehicle itself, right? And this is definitely something that we're starting to see more and more, as there are more APIs that the OEMs expose and more services to that. So definitely we start to see real attacks, and we're starting to see the importance of correlating both the context of the vehicle, the APIs, and the consumers to make sure that we have sort of a holistic view on the threats.
Fantastic, thank you. So I actually see that Nishant is back online, and so we're discussing, Nishant, obviously about the API security topic, but I wonder if you'd like to restart from the previous question that was really, really important for you, right? The one about integrated IT, OT, SOC infrastructure.
Right. Thanks, Rick. And I realize I should not be last always. Yeah. By the time I wait to answer, my connection can go bad. Sorry for that. So what I was answering, no worries. What I was answering is the IT SOC. So the question I would ask is why we want to have IT SOC separate than VSOC, because we just discussed the vehicle is not a typical vehicle anymore. It's more on IT and software driven vehicle, right? And if you have software driven, IT driven vehicle, of course, a lot of things, not all maybe, are still in the IT domain. And so I would definitely see a use case, and we have been working with different OEMs where we have a case where IT SOC and VSOC is separate, and we have a case where they are combined, and we see a lot of efficiency when they are combined. Saying that does not mean you can just replicate IT SOC and convert it into VSOC, but of course the available bandwidth, available infrastructure, available resources can be modulated, can be trained for an efficient VSOC. So that is the takeaway from my experience. Coming to the API security topic, you mentioned just now, and I agree with Yaniv, because think of API, or what I understand from API is like a windows in a house, right? So we have a house without windows, it's secure, but we don't want it, right? So we don't want a house without windows. And the more windows, there are more threats, there are more possibility for the intrusion. And hence, we see that if we want the vehicle to be connected to the backend, to the Bluetooth, to the mobile app, to the third party, to the dealers, to the workshop, to OBDs and whatever, then definitely we need to secure the APIs. Otherwise, we are losing some white spots through which our rest of the security can go in vain. Yeah, so that's my takeaway on that.
Fantastic, thank you so much. Leonard, would you like to address the API security topic?
Sure, and I'd like to agree to my colleagues, because in order to talk about API security, we have to agree on the role of APIs as the gateway or glue between consumers of a service, for example, an app requesting to unlock a vehicle, and the providers of services, for example, the server issuing a command to the vehicle to unlock the vehicle. And we have already talked about different kinds of service providers in the connected vehicle ecosystem, and this underlines the importance of monitoring each of the APIs connecting consumers and providers of such services in terms of cybersecurity, especially with the various connectivity states of vehicles, which makes this task even more important.
Fantastic, thank you so much. So we're going to address the last two topics before moving on to questions from our audience who has been with us all this time already. Thank you for that. Now, as they say, not all OEMs were born equal. In fact, it is probably not far-fetched to state that each OEM has very unique characteristics. Even then, considering the possibility to group OEMs into market segments, I wonder if we should be aware of any specific requirements for manufacturers focused on passenger vehicles, commercial vehicles, agri and construction, pure electric vehicles. And I know for a fact that in our audiences, there's a lot of interest in EVs in particular. I wonder if Leonard, would you like to start?
Sure, thank you so much. So looking only at the different types of vehicles, we should be aware that there are specific requirements related to the differences between vehicle types and regarding threat levels and security monitoring capabilities. One example of this would be that commercial vehicles, classical ICE or internal combustion engine vehicles, and electrical vehicles tend to have a different set of sensors and vehicle architectures. A commercial vehicle, for example, could be modified to allow for heavy-duty operations like the type of work, construction, or forestry vehicles are being used for. And this, in turn, will lead to different threat scenarios, risk assessments, and in consequence also to different security monitoring requirements compared to, let's say, the typical passenger vehicle.
Excellent, excellent. Perhaps Nishant.
Yes, definitely. So I think this makes a very critical use case. When we say VSOC, is it going to be the same in the different, let's say, subsector, right? So you're talking about agriculture, you're talking about defense, let's say, where we have commercial vehicles, we have passenger vehicles, and then we can also differentiate between type of combustion engine or type of engine, let's say electric vehicles or hybrid and all those things. It's not going to be very different, right? So the other day I was talking to a farmer and I was trying to oversell the cybersecurity, and he was really interested only in the rubber on the tire, yeah, to see how much pressure it applies on the earth, right? And I realized that for each industry, in that case, sub-industry, let's say, there are definitely different use cases. And there are different cybersecurity components and could be different cybersecurity logs, right, that we have to obtain from those vehicles, because looking at the speed, looking at the, let's say, the geography where they can move, possibly, I think there could be different use cases. So it may not be very different vehicle SOC for each of these sectors, but there would be specific use cases which we have to prioritize based on those subsectors. That's my take.
Makes a lot of sense. Thank you. Yaniv, what's your view?
Sure. So to segment, maybe I'd offer a few types of segments. So one could be, passenger car versus commercial vehicles, for example. So you can view it from, let's say, the perspective of the attack surface, right? So we can imagine that, for example, a traditional passenger car manufacturer with tens of millions of connected vehicles would have a larger attack surface than a commercial vehicle manufacturer with possibly much lower volume of vehicles. So that would be one aspect. I think EVs were mentioned before. We're seeing there are new types of threats. So, for example, threats resulting from charging stations that communicate with vehicles. So this is something that we already saw and believe we will see more in the future. And also specific types of threats or risks even on the EVs. So, for example, certain types of behaviors, either malicious or non-malicious, but that can lead, for example, to battery drainage. Again, not a type of a risk or attack that we've seen in other types of vehicles. And then lastly, maybe the view on geographies, where maybe the majority of OEMs are global in nature, but usually have more presence in this or that geography. So could be different regulations in certain geographies that you need to address, or even different types of threats. So we've seen, for example, certain areas that are more prone to fraud, and maybe other areas more prone to cyber attacks. So also something to keep in mind.
Fantastic, thank you. So moving on to our last topic for today, before our questions and answers. So it's a question about the future of the VSOC, right? And I'm thinking along the lines of three macro areas. First of all, the extension of cybersecurity monitoring for mobility services and use cases that are becoming more common attack vectors, such as the EV charging infrastructure. The second macro area is the expansion of new modes of transportation. We haven't, for example, mentioned autonomous driving at all, delivery drones, right? We hear the IAA, and you see multiple examples of these new modes of transportation. And then the launch of subscription services to get access to specific features. Think of BMW's monthly subscription to heated seats that was announced a few weeks ago. So this assumed that all vehicles would be shipped with overspec hardware and software, which would be unavailable unless the client pays for usage. So we already see today OEMs' interest in extending the use of VSOCs to known cyber use cases, and we alluded to this fact earlier, fraud management, data observability, and repair warranty management. But the question is, I'm getting to the question, guys, taking into consideration the pace of change, what will the VSOC look like in 5 or 10 years' time? I guess perhaps Nishant would like to take this one first.
Definitely, yeah. So I think it's a pretty interesting question. Actually, it also gives you a 360-degree view and also joins back to your first question, why now, right? We discussed why and why now, and I said that, yeah, the driver is the regulation, but it's not going to stop at this point because there are a lot of things which have gone in, and OEMs, or let's say the fleet managers would like to stop here because they want to exploit the existing functionality, right? Yes. And think about this, that you have a vehicle running and you have infrastructure, you have a bandwidth available, you have some kind of IT systems, CM, SOAR architecture, you have analysts sitting, then why you want to stop at only security? Yeah, so there are a lot of business use cases. Some of them you already mentioned, for example, subscription services. The others can be, for example, features on demand. There can be predictive maintenance, and think about insurance. So if you go deeper, I'm paying insurance for my vehicle for the whole year, although I'm driving maybe 3 months effectively, because in the night I'm not driving, on weekends maybe I'm not driving. So why do I pay for insurance when I'm not driving, right? So all these use cases would definitely come as part of the business, and the OEMs or the managers would definitely go to see, can we use the existing infrastructure, in this case VSOC, to efficiently manage our business also, right? And I'm sure in the future, in few years, you will see it will not be called as VSOC, rather VBOC, so Vehicle Business Operations Center, right? Because security remains the central point, definitely, but there will be a lot of use cases built for business around it, and hence it will be much more useful, much more efficient, and much more beneficial for the OEMs or for the customers who have invested quite some money now. Back to you, Rick.
Thank you, Nishant. Perhaps Leonard, would you like to go next?
Sure. Thank you so much. I'm trying to not repeat what Nishant already said and touched upon, but I would like to draw a picture, because a VSOC can be like in the middle of a picture, and we have different forces driving the evolution, the role and scope of a VSOC. So if we're talking about a VSOC, we have to keep in mind that regulations will change, the foundational asset, the vehicle will change, for example, from ICE vehicle to EV, commercial vehicles will change also. The OEMs, so the organization building and running the VSOC will change. And we will have the ecosystem, which will also change if we're talking about vehicle to infrastructure and vehicle to everything, connectivity and APIs, which we already touched upon earlier. So I would say VSOCs will most certainly evolve, and the role and scope will change. And I will also expect VSOCs to play a role in developing new business cases for OEMs, and not only protecting new revenue streams like the subscription service you already mentioned, but also because of the data quality requirements a VSOC has towards the data coming from a vehicle. I would expect the data gathered in future will enable new use cases, maybe some kind of new predictive maintenance business cases, but will ultimately have side effects, positive side effects on the data quality coming from vehicle data.
Excellent. Thank you. All right. So, Yaniv.
Yes, I think Yes, Rick, I think a few, maybe a few possible directions, right? And maybe some of them will not even include the OEMs as the ones running the VSOC, but maybe just to stay with the OEM perspective. So definitely, I agree with both my colleagues that we will either see sort of a vehicle operations center that is doing operational things, including cyber, or that, as we discussed before, we could see something that is more like a cyber fusion center, so dealing with all cybersecurity aspects of vehicles, including the connected vehicles. So that's, I think, in regards to OEM, I think very two possible directions. But again, could be something else. Could be, for example, fleet managers of autonomous vehicles, right, as running their own VSOCs. Maybe large municipalities, maybe other types of players in that market, especially when we're starting to see, how complex it is to control this type of ecosystem, and I not mention, autonomous vehicles and smart cities and vehicle to X, whatever it will be in the future. So again, something that is hugely complex and might have to be compartmentalized to certain geographies or to certain areas, because it's going to be very complex to operate. And that, I think, something that we will see again, not necessarily just OEMs running this, but also other types of players sort of doubling down on cybersecurity of a very complex landscape.
Excellent, excellent. Well, thank you so much, guys. We have received a number of very interesting questions, so please bear with me. We're going to go through a few of them before closing this fantastic webinar in your company. So the first question is, what role can telecom operators play in the field of vehicle cybersecurity? What services can they offer, over what infrastructure, and to whom? Vehicle manufacturers, users, insurers, fleet managers. So if you don't mind, guys, I will take this question to start with. The first question I take because of my past experience in one such telecom operator. I was in Vodafone IoT. And I would say most of the telecom operators that I've come across have invested in their own secure operating centers. They have amazing B2C and B2B customer centers experience, and I guess cybersecurity is essentially an extension, especially for those who have invested in telematics service providers, SOCs. Cybersecurity is essentially an extension of what they're doing today. So they can definitely play an important role, I would say. And next question is, what are the factors necessary to unleash the full capacity of a vehicle SOC? It's quite an open question. I wonder, Nishant, would you like to take that one?
Yes, definitely. I'm happy to take this up. I think the question is very good. And also it reflects our thoughts on the last question we discussed about the VBOC, right? So when we say unleash, I would not stop at security, right? So I think even if you say security or security plus something on business side, we have to understand, first of all, the awareness. Yeah. So what is the VSOC, right? And how is it built? Yeah. So can we exploit the functionality, right? So I think first thing and foremost thing for me is the awareness, not only within the OEM, but also in the ecosystem. So maybe the suppliers, the tier 1, tier 2s, or the third party digital service providers and things like that. So we need that awareness, and then somebody needs to sit and derive the use cases end to end from one point to another. Now, again, as I said, it doesn't have to be security driven. It can be business or functional use cases. And unless and until we have that kind of scenario, we cannot use or exploit the existing bandwidth. If we don't know what we have, we cannot really use it to the full. So I think these two things are definitely needed. Of course, the technology will change, as Leonard says, the vehicle will change, and of course, those modifications will be needed. A lot of onboarding will be needed forever. It's a continuous improvement exercise. But for all of these, we need to have that awareness and that kind of business use cases in picture.
Perfect. Okay, so Leonard, so I'm going to ask the next question to you. So be ready with an answer, please. So what is the biggest challenge when setting up a VSOC for an established OEM versus a greenfield manufacturer? Do you like the question?
Yes, I do. That's a nice one. Thank you so much. So one of the biggest challenges we typically see is to find an organizational home, as I like to call it, for the VSOC, as most processes, roles, and tools used in a VSOC are located at the intersection of the typically called EE, electrical engineering, IT, quality, and after sales department. And I'm really sorry to once again draw a picture here, but it's located at the intersection of those departments or functions in established OEMs. And established OEMs have proven processes, for example, to respond to any kind of product safety issue, if there's anything that can be leveraged in a VSOC when responding, for example, to cybersecurity incidents. And that's great, but greenfield VSOC implementations will enable OEMs to be a bit more, let's say, by the book, and won't have to take into account any kind of legacy applications or processes, but will bring a bigger requirement for change in terms of collaboration between the departments and also mindset towards cybersecurity.
Fantastic. I love this organizational perspective. Thank you, Leonard.
So, Eric, can I add to this?
Yes, of course, please.
Yeah, so very, very nice point and very good question, because this is a very practical question about greenfield and an existing IT SOC, right? Yes. And sometimes it might feel easy to build a VSOC on an IT SOC, existing IT SOC, let's say, but it could take a lot of efforts to unlearn some things which the IT SOC, let's say, team knows it, because they have been living it for years on traditional IT, and it makes a lot of unlearning efforts to really start them to understand how is VSOC a little bit different, because everybody wants to use the existing capability, existing license, existing resources, and it's very hard to tell, yeah, it's a vehicle, I understand it's IT, it's software, but it is a little bit different. So that unlearning can be really tedious. So back to you.
Maybe Rick, I can also
yes.
add again, based on our experience, right? And something that traditional OEMs usually have, as maybe something that we hadn't talked about a lot, but a VSOC can really benefit, and that's an understatement, from the multidisciplinary aspects that are, the knowledge in the OEM, right? Because at the end of the day, this is a product that the OEMs manufactures, and almost I'd say 80% of the people in the organization are invested into that. And so what we are able to see at let's say the traditional or more veterans OEMs, that there are people that went along, 20, 15, 20, 30 years, right? So they experience in many aspects of the OEMs, and we can, find the people with the right experience that can sort of share this multidisciplinary view that is needed. With the greenfield OEM, that's going to be probably harder to do. So you'll need to find, the right mix of people from across the organization to be part of that. So maybe there's, again, something that differentiates between them.
Yeah, very, very good point. So, well, let's see who wants to take the next one. So based on your experience, is it easier to justify investments in a VSOC mainly from a cybersecurity perspective, or does it help to position non-cyber use cases from day one? Who wants to go first?
I can take, if you allow.
Yeah. Sure.
All right. So I would say both. The answer is not either or, the answer is both, because they are not mutually exclusive. Yeah. So I would not say that only cybersecurity is not a justification. It is definitely, because you have seen the recent threats, you have seen the attacks, right? And real world attacks, not researcher attacks. You have seen the recent attacks. And look at the amount of energy and investment they have put in to get out of it, right? And then put the remediation measures, right? Think about this, have they done it before, right? So it's not only the reputational damage, which you can't measure anyway, yeah, but also the operational inefficiency, the other things which are involved, right? The customer dissatisfaction, right? And think when it is coming to the vehicle, how much it comes to when you want a data privacy leakage, or you want to handle a customer safety issue and things like that. So I would say even with the cybersecurity, the justification is there. But if we build over and above that, the use case is what we discussed in the panel, I'm pretty sure there is no question other than yes. So I think it is definitely important, even if it's for cybersecurity, but if you build more and more, it is obvious for you to decide and go for it. Back to you.
Excellent. Anyone else wants to add anything to this point? No? Okay, we're very, I want to select the last two questions in rapid sequence. At the very end, is setting up a VSOC a one-time effort, or are there ongoing onboarding or configuration activities to take into account? Leonard?
Yes, thank you so much. I was just about to say I'd like to take this one. So as a VSOC consists of tools, processes, and roles, I would say it's not a one-time effort. Maybe the initial implementation and setup of tooling and processes, and maybe even the creation of roles, is a one-time thing, but there will be ongoing activities in terms of use case implementation, tuning, review, and the onboarding of new data sources and the refinement of standard operating procedures or SOPs, as well as the onboarding of new people. And we also have in mind, we talked about this a couple of times earlier in our session, that a lot of things are going to be evolving, and risk assessment and risk management will also be an ongoing activity. So of course, there are a lot of ongoing activities in a VSOC, and they should be ongoing.
Excellent. Okay, the very, very last question. Does the upstream platform replaces the use of a SIEM completely? Yaniv, perhaps this one for you.
Sure. I think that question is the answer to that question sort of dependent on the role of the VSOC, as we discussed before. And like I said, I think we've seen the vast majority of VSOCs today are sort of running as a standalone function. And to that, I would say the upstream platform is something that does replace a SIEM, as it basically ingests all the relevant data sources and provides also the capabilities that are in existing SIEM, like rule-based detection and machine learning and anomaly detection, and of course investigation capabilities. And also, in addition to that, digital twin with representation of the assets that we monitor. So the vehicles, the consumers, the APIs, etc. That is something that SIEMs do not provide. And again, this context is very important for this type of assets and this type of investigation and response. Having said that, in other types of VSOC that are also handling IT aspects, we definitely see sort of synergies between the upstream platform and a SIEM platform, when basically each can alert each other, and basically a decision can be made. So who would be sort of the go-to system in order to respond to alerts and have sort of a centralized, alert and ticketing management in place.
Fantastic. So thank you. We just come to the end of this event. I would really like to thank you, Leonard, Nishant, Yaniv. It feels as if we've gone through a masterclass of the VSOC in this hour. I would like to remind our audience that there will be a recorded version available of this webinar on our website soon. And I'd like to thank also our friends at Mobex and Metelnave, who helped us with the organization of this event for today. So thank you all, and I wish you a great rest of your day.
Thank you, and take care.
Thank you so much. Take care.
Bye.